Welcome to another in our series of Kehillat Israel podcasts. This is a recording of Rabbi Amy Bernstein's weekly Friday morning Torah study.
We are in Parshat Behar this morning, so we are at Leviticus 25:1. The book of Leviticus, chapter 25, verse 1. If we're in the triennial cycle, people, how come we're starting at the beginning of Parshat Behar? You were going to ask me that. See? These are my people who have been learning because I'm a rabbi. I start where I want. That's one explanation. That is a viable explanation. The rabbi starts where she wants. Why else might it be that if we're in the third year of the triennial division, we're starting at the beginning of the Parsha?
It's a short Parsha.
It's a short Parsha. That is part of the answer as well, Pam. The reason is because we are in a leap year. We have a second Adar. Generally, Parshat Behar is read with Parshat Bechukotai. So it's usually referenced, and my bar mitzvah kids can never pronounce it, Behar Bechukotai is their Torah portion because it is stuck together. We added a month of Adar, a second Adar in leap year, yes? To rectify the calendars. The Passover doesn't wind up in the summer. So that means we have 4 extra Shabbatot. So we pull those 2 Parshiot apart and read one each Shabbat this week and next week. Behar this week, Bechukotai next week. So that is how, in the third triennial, we are at the beginning of the Parsha. Just in case it was going to keep you up tonight. Right? Okay. All right. So we are 25:1.
The Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai. Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land that I assign to you, the land shall observe a Sabbath of the Lord. 6 years you may sow your field, and 6 years you may prune your vineyard and gather in the yield. But in the 7th year, the land shall have a Sabbath of complete rest, a Sabbath of the Lord. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. You shall not reap the aftergrowth of your harvest or gather the grapes of your untrimmed vines. It shall be a year of complete rest for the land. But you may eat whatever the land during its Sabbath will produce. You, your male and female slaves, the hired and bound laborers who live with you, and your cattle and the beasts in your land may eat all its yield. You shall count off 7 weeks of years, 7 times 7 years, so that the period of 7 weeks of years gives you a total of 49 years. Then you shall sound the horn loud. In the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, the Day of Atonement, you shall have the horn sounded throughout your land, and you shall hallow the 50th year. You shall proclaim release throughout the land for all its inhabitants. It shall be a jubilee for you. Each of you shall return to his holding, and each of you shall return to his family. That 50th year shall be a jubilee to you. You shall not sow, neither shall you reap the aftergrowth or harvest the untrimmed vines, for it is a jubilee. It shall be holy to you. You may only eat the growth direct from the field.
All right. So we are getting the laws in Leviticus of Shemitah and of Yovel. Right? So 2 different ways that Torah is suggesting that permanent wage gap, permanent wealth gap is unacceptable. Any kind of permanent gap between rich and poor, according to Torah, is unjust. Period. End of sentence. Nobody gets to acquire so much that forever and ever, world without end, amen, those people get to gain more, while other people fall further and further into poverty. That is not just. And the community, the society that Torah says they are to build in the land of Israel when they get there is one of justice and an attempt at equity. Now, stuff happens, right? You have an agricultural society, you have 2-3 years of drought, and what happens? Nothing grows. And if nothing grows, I have nothing to sell. If I have nothing to sell, tell me what happens. So 2 or 3 years in a row I have nothing to sell. What happens?
You have nothing to eat.
What?
Go to Egypt.
You have to go to Egypt. Right? If the famine goes on long enough, I have to go to Egypt. But let's just say I'm in a part of the country that's not getting enough rainfall. 2 or 3 years in a row, my crops, forget even just failing, they don't leave me surplus enough to sell.
You have to sell the land.
So eventually, I have to sell the land, because for the first few years, I can buy seed, right, with whatever savings I have. Eventually, if I don't get enough produce to make a profit, I can't buy seed for next year. And if I can't buy seed and I can't plant, what am I supposed to do in an agrarian society? I have to essentially sell my land. I can stay on the property. We're not clear, but we think this may be about staying on the property and working the land that you no longer own. Once that happens, how am I supposed to ever, as a worker, as a laborer, make enough money and put away enough money to buy my land back? Is that ever going to happen? No. What I get paid in wages to work the land will never allow me to buy my land back. Therefore, I am in perpetual indentured servitude. I'm in perpetual poverty. And according to Torah, that is unacceptable. So what do?
Ask for federal aid.
Ask for federal aid. No. Jewish free loan is how we solved some of that, or tried to solve some of that problem in this country, right? Exactly. To say, okay, I've done well, but I know because of no fault of their own, other Jews haven't, and so we will offer loans at no interest. That is, right, what's the acronym again for the Hebrew Free Loan Society? Anyway, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, right, did all of these kinds of did all these kinds of right things for Jews immigrating to this country. Okay, so that is a very Jewish value. That there are some people who are poor, and we're not going to ask questions about how and why they got to be poor. What we're going to do is do our best to help them. That is it. That is this old. That Jewish value is this old. The vision of that being the case is this old. Now, we're going to ask some different questions about whether or not it actually ever happened. It's a different set of questions. But the vision is that perpetual poverty, because of a gap around land ownership, is unacceptable. All right, so a couple of things. So before we get to that, when you come to the land, you're going to every week observe a Shabbat. Every seventh year, the land will observe a Shabbat. Yeah? So the land lies fallow, and you don't own what the land then produces on its own. So I have fields and crops. In the 6th year, that's the last year I'm planting and harvesting. The 7th year, whatever grows naturally on its own, everyone is allowed to eat. Everyone. So I can't enforce, right, the fences around my orchard in the 7th year, because anyone is allowed to come eat those apples.
Was that revolutionary at that time?
I do not know.
Even that's not enough to subsist for very long, what you can pick in one season.
Correct. You only subsist on it for that season.
Right.
You got to plant the next year. So we had a discussion last week about the calendar. Yes? Yeah. When does according to last week, according to Parshat Emor, when does the year begin?
September.
Spring.
Yes,
the year begins in the spring. And the first harvest is the wheat harvest in the springtime. Some rabbis want to argue we have evidence that actually already we have the year actually beginning in the fall, because if it began in the spring, then you're essentially living without produce for 2 years. That it was a later planting and harvest that was the last one allowed in year 6. And then, because otherwise, if it's the one starting in the springtime, right, then they calculate that it would be almost 2 years before you actually, that you were going without, right.
Doesn't this mean that unless they have a bumper crop in year 5 and year 6, they're in drought in year 7 and potentially year 8?
So the big concern is, well, wait a minute, if I'm not planting and I'm not harvesting, like, I'm supposed to go without my salary for a whole year? That's going to break my family. So God assures the people that you will have enough. You will have great crops in year 5 and 6. Not to worry. So no worries, right? Right, Bob? No worries.
5 and 6 earth years, or
Yeah, right? Or dog years. All right. So the land gets a complete rest. This is Shemitah. So what is the point of giving the land a Shabbat? Why is that part of building an ethical and just society? This is not about, so the poor get to access it, so that's a good thing. But why letting the land have Shabbat? How does that contribute to the character of the society?
At least you think it's your land.
Ha. Mm-hmm. Lest you think once I get there and they parcel out the land, it belongs to me. Every 7th year, you don't get to touch it, because who does it belong to? God. I might say, to itself. It doesn't belong to you, it belongs to itself. You get to use it. Just like you get to manipulate the world for 6 days, one day, you accept things as they are. So it is with the land. You get to manipulate it and do what you want with it for 6 years, and then 1 year, you let it be. It's not yours.
Isn't there a parallel to the human body, to the idea of the human body, that our bodies don't belong to us either?
And time doesn't belong to us. Right? Nothing belongs to us. Nothing. Which is the whole spiritual practice of reorientation that happens every 7th day. Oh, right. This time doesn't belong to me to decide what I get to do with it. That I'm going to take 6 more accounts. You don't get to, it doesn't belong to you. Yeah?
It's also part of the sabbatical process in universities. You get a 7th year to recuperate and rebuild.
Right. But in that case, I don't know that it doesn't belong to you. I think in that case, actually, it's the other way. I've earned this year of sabbatical. It's mine, and I'm going to go learn how to train dolphins, or which one of my rabbinical school colleagues did on his sabbatical. And I was very jealous because I chose to serve a Reform synagogue in Haifa, and he was training dolphins. I'm like, why didn't I think of that? I'm doing rabbi work, and he's training dolphins. When am I ever going to get to train dolphins for 6 months? Oh, thank you, Sarah. And that would probably be a much easier job if those people weren't Jewish.
You chose.
Right? Oh, God help me. All right.
That's true.
Verse 8. Usafarta lecha sheva shabbatot shanim, sheva shanim, sheva pa'amim. You shall count off 7 weeks of years. 7 times 7 years. So that the period of 7 weeks of years gives you a total of 49 years, right? 7 sets of 7 years is 49 years. Then what's going to happen? Verse 9. Ve'avarta shofar tru'ah b'chodesh hashvi'i ba'asor lachodesh b'yom ha'kippurim. We read about this last week, didn't we? Yeah. We have at the beginning of the Chodesh Hashvi'i, in the 7th month, on the first day of that month, what happens?
Yom Tru'ah.
Yom Tru'ah. We sound a horn, right? We sound a horn on the first day of the 7th month. In the 50th year, in that month, you're going to have Yom Tru'ah, the first day of that month. Now we call it, of course, Rosh Hashanah. But here it's the 7th month because the year begins in the spring. So the 7th month, the first day of the month, you're going to have Tru'ah, you're going to have a blast of the horn, and then on Yom HaKippurim, what's going to happen? You're going to sound the shofar Tru'ah. You're going to sound Tru'ah again.
So that means you're allowed to sound the shofar Yom Kippur that year?
Betach. Of course.
Which normally we're not allowed to do.
Bert.
For other reasons.
You silly, silly man. So there was no prohibition against carrying on Yom Kippur in biblical times. Shh, don't tell that to the rabbis. But there was no prohibitions on Yom Kippur.
Okay.
You're just not allowed to work. How do the rabbis define the work that we refrain from? Do you know?
We don't do whatever it took to build the Mishkan.
Beautiful. Because the laws of not working on Shabbat come immediately before the instructions to build the Mishkan, the rabbis say, there must be a connection, because it's divine revelation, hello. It's not an accident, God forbid. Therefore, when it says melacha, when it says work, and then you get all these tasks associated with building the Mishkan, it must mean those tasks are the definition of melacha. So anything done in building the Mishkan, see how we learn so much more, Mark, than just the text in front of us at this class? Anything done in relationship to building the Mishkan, building the tabernacle, would have been considered melacha. That's how the rabbis define melacha. Carrying, portage, would have been part of that. Therefore, portage must be considered melacha, and therefore it is forbidden on Shabbat and holidays.
Unless you're within an Arab.
Unless you're within a courtyard. Correct.
Where does that come from?
What?
The Arab got bigger and bigger.
That the law says you can carry within your courtyard because it's not portage. Right? You're not carrying it somewhere else as work. It's in your own backyard. You're doing your life. If I'm going to serve Shabbat lunch, I have to carry the pot. The women have to carry the pot from the kitchen to where I'm serving. So you can't outlaw all carrying. So how do they define carrying as melacha? When is carrying melacha? When it's outside of your
But didn't the courtyard, now it's become greatly expanded.
Now whole cities have this nice little wire around it on posts so that people can carry within that neighborhood or within that town. Because only Jews come up with laws and then ways around the laws. Only Jews do that as a sport. As a sport. All right, a sacred sport. All right, wait, we got off track. Where was I? Huh? Thank you, Richard. Verse 8. Okay, so we're counting off 7 sets of 7 years. That gives us 49. In the 50th year, we have Yovel. Yeah? And what is Yovel in English?
Jubilee.
Jubilee. And what will be declared in the Jubilee? Freedom. How's Torah talk about that? Dor. If, believe it or not, this is a Hebrew name in Israel. Dror. Seriously. D-R-O-R. Dror. It's a horrible name. It's a horrible name. So what is going to be proclaimed is Dror, release. Release throughout your land. So Yom Kippur, another shofar blast to proclaim that it is Yovel. It is the Jubilee. And Dror is proclaimed throughout the land. Okay.
Do you know where we are relative to the Jubilee year right now?
I do not.
But it's not this year.
I have no idea. I think I would have heard something if it was this year.
The shofar, at least.
Is it celebrated at all? I mean, is today?
I don't know.
I mean, in the Orthodox community?
They know when it's Shemitah. They know when it's the 7th year, but it became financially impossible to enact in the land of Israel this idea of
But
ceasing
there's no
all.
celebration or no commemoration.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. All right. You shall You shall proclaim release throughout the land for all its inhabitants, and shall be a jubilee for you. I'm at verse 10. Each of you shall return to your holding, and each of you return to your family. All right. So we're going to get Shemitah here also, right? No harvesting. You leave the land alone. So it's a big Shabbat for the land. But what else happens? What is the release? What is the dror about? Pam?
You release your workers and you go return to your land.
Well, do you own the land at that point?
So, the release is for bound laborers and the land. That's who and what gets released. So people who are indebted slaves, indebted servitude people, they get to go back to their families. They are released.
For good or just for the year?
For good. Permanently. Their status changes at Yovel. At the Yovel, they are no longer slaves or indebted servants. Same with the land. The land experiences dror and goes back to its original owners.
Oh, what do you mean it's original?
Oh, Carol asks, what do we mean? Original owners. Who's the original owner? God. So what is the original owner here? Who are we talking about? Who am I going to give it back to? Who do I?
Nature.
Bless you.
Where's Amulet's son?
Bless you.
Bring on the sneeze. So who am I going to sign the papers over to? The property, the title to the property. I can't sign it over to God, obviously.
It's the member of the tribe that the descendants of the members of the tribe that were assigned that part of the land.
Right. There was a parceling out of the land when they got there.
Later.
A lot later. Right? So remember, this is not linear history, right? This is written long after there's an understanding of tribal land. This is written long after they've been living on the land as tribes, yes? Okay. So the land goes back to its original owner. Who's the original owner? Descendants of the people who were given the land at the conquest.
By God.
Which conquest?
When we entered the land.
Whichever.
Yeah. The one that
Never.
All right. So at the conquest, the land is apportioned, and those descendants receive the entitlement to that land for eternity. That was considered fair.
So does that mean it's just been 50 years since the land was taken and now has to go back? Because this only happens every 50 years.
Every 50 years,
Right.
you return the land to its original owner.
Right.
This doesn't assume anything about what year it is right now. They're in the desert.
Yes, but if it's 50 years and they return it forever,
No, they return it. Well, they return it, but then if someone should lose it over the next 50 years, at that 50 year, it goes back.
you start over again.
You start over again. This is how you keep the playing field equal. That I may do well, and it may be most of my lifetime. I mean, I'm 54, right? So it may be most of my lifetime that my family enjoys access to this land. But after those 50 years, it resets. Yes, Bert.
I checked, and according to Chabad, this is no longer applicable and will only become applicable
When Mashiach comes.
at a future time when we are all restored to the land, including the lost tribes.
Yeah. There you go.
If we can find them.
I'm glad that you looked at that.
So we don't need to worry about it.
We don't need to worry about it.
And that's why you didn't know.
If they released all the laborers, where
Right.
Why do they need new laborers?
They don't have anything.
They don't have any land.
Yeah.
Oh.
This creates a real problem.
If the land reverts back to its original owners, the original owners work the land and hire laborers.
Because they don't have jobs either. Because the laborers wouldn't have jobs either.
Right? Everybody goes back to their ancestral holdings, and then you can hire people to work your land. Carol, why does this cause a problem?
Well, you're out of a job. I mean, pretty much, and you're out of housing, and you're out of everything, and you have a family. And what do you do?
What do you do? Did you just say steal money from someone else, Linda Scheibel? I didn't think so. Oh my
Did
goodness.
this ever happen? Do we know?
So to Carol's point, most likely this never happened.
Oh, okay.
Most likely, this was the vision. This is the ideal, written by people who never enacted it.
Yeah, 'cause I suppose if you try to play it out, how might it actually work in a real society? Let's say that I'm descended from the tribe of Reuben. Reuben got some land, right? Or the tribe of Reuben got some land, right? So, and then I decide that I don't want to. That's not where I'm meant to be. I want to be a merchant in Jerusalem. So so I create a little shop in Jerusalem, and I do my stuff. And then the Jubilee year comes along, and now I have to go back to the land. My shop is gone. I don't want to be a farmer. Now what do I do? So I guess as a practical matter, this doesn't work.
Take all the numbers of sacrifices we see happening at the Mishkan.
That doesn't work either.
That doesn't work either. An imaginary system that might have been lovely, but if you add up all the bulls it required to make all those sacrifices at the tabernacle, there's no way that any population could have supported that many bulls in the middle of nowhere.
I think there is a logical disconnect because in the year of the Yovel, you are creating a new underclass. Because all of a sudden they go up, and this is in a situation where this Parshas is trying to say everything is equal, but you put people. It's kind of like Zimbabwe, where people came off the land and just were in trouble. So I don't see any situation where this is even fair.
Right. So in its ideal, it's fair because those underclass people are descendants of some tribe and some clan in that tribe. Therefore, they would revert to their original allotment of land. Like in the ideal. But, in the practical, right, what does it actually do? It creates complete instability, right, and chaos.
Yeah, but the thought, I think I get the thought, which was that at that time, there were only two stocks of value I can think of. One would have been farm animals, and the other was the land. So the concept is that if that was at that time. Now we have other stocks of value, but that was sort of the situation then. That was where all the wealth was. So it's saying every 50 years we need to level the amount of wealth per person.
Yes. So I would add one category of stock, and that is human labor.
Yes,
right? So land, pastoral animals, and human labor. So yes, it was a way to completely revert back to the original at the time of the gaining of the land. Forget about who we kicked off the land to make it Reuven's, or Shimon's, right? Forget about who we kicked off to take it, but we took it because it was given to us by God. And so when we took it, then it's an attempt to say whatever's happened between then and 50 years, we're going to take care of it. We're going to level the playing field so that the gap just never gets so big that it is insurmountable.
Well, has that ever happened either?
George?
Well, the current analogy is a 90% inheritance tax. It doesn't go to the poor, but it goes to the government, which ultimately it's taken from the rich.
Exactly. This is exactly the same idea, that the wealthy, rather than pass all of that wealth down to the next generation, who will have even more wealth because they'll have even more interest and even more stocks and even more, right? So the idea, yes, is that you tax the transfer of that money from one generation to the next. That money goes to the government, who is the one to take care of the people who are left at the bottom side of that completely unequal ratio of wealth. So this is who's writing this? What source is this? What are our sources for all the Torah material? What are our sources? Somebody tell me.
Priestly. It's P.
Y-J.
Who else? Come on. Huh?
The Elohist.
One more.
D.
Okay.
Deuteronomy.
So, our source material for the Torah: the Yahwist, the Elohist, the priestly source, and the Deuteronomist. Guess how many of them address, you don't get to answer, guess how many of them address this business?
None.
Actually.
Oh.
3 of them.
They do.
I'm not sure if it's J or E. But yes.
Address the Shemitah and all.
And how do they address it differently?
Oh, funny you should ask. Plant. Exodus 23. Keep your finger at Leviticus 25. Flip back to Exodus 23.
23 what?
Yeah?
23:1.
23:1. No. Wait, 23. Where am I?
It's actually verse 10, I believe.
All right. Bert is saying it's at verse 10.
You're looking for 6.
Yes. Page 440.
Or 472 in the red book.
472 in the red book. 440 in the green. Verse 10. Read, Bert.
6 years you shall sow your land and gather in its yield, but in the 7th you shall let it rest and lie fallow. Let the needy among your people eat of it, and what they leave let the wild beasts eat. You shall do the same with your vineyards and your olive groves.
Go on.
6 days you shall do your work, but on the 7th day you shall cease from labor, in order that your ox and your ass may rest, and that your bondman and the stranger may be refreshed.
Okay. So we get Shemitah, yes, and we get Shabbat for the land, no tilling and harvesting, and we get, what do you call it? A 7th day of rest, a Shabbat for us, and for the animals, and for the laborers, right? And the Ger Toshav, someone who's living among you, even if they are not Israelite, they get Shabbat. All right, what is our D source, Bert? Keep your finger at Leviticus 25. And what is our D source?
It's right up there, 15:1.
You want me to turn around?
15:1.
Okay.
Oh, sorry.
Deuteronomy 15:1. See, if you were a biblical scholar, you'd be doing this all the time, people.
And if you had a scroll, it would take you a long time.
Right? 15:1. 11:29 in the green.
And it's like 15:1. 1077. 1076 in the red book.
11:29 in the green. All right, go for it, Bert.
Every 7th year you shall practice remission of debts. This shall be the nature of the remission. Every creditor shall remit the due that he claims from his fellow. He shall not dun his fellow or kinsman, for the remission proclaimed is of the Lord. You may dun the foreigner, but you must remit whatever is due to you from your kinsman.
Go on.
There shall be no needy among you, since the Lord your God will bless you in the land that the Lord your God is giving you as hereditary portion, if only you heed the Lord your God and take care to keep all his instructions that I enjoin upon you this day. For the Lord your God will bless you as he has promised you. You will extend loans to many nations, but require none yourself. You will dominate many nations, but they will not dominate you.
Drop to verse 8. Patoach tiftach.
7.
You must.
I see 9. I don't see. Rather you must open your hand and lend him sufficient for whatever he needs. Beware lest you harbor the base thought, the 7th year, the year of remission, is approaching, so that you are mean to your needy kinsman and give him nothing. He will cry out to the Lord against you, and you will incur guilt. Give to him readily, and have no regrets when you do so, for in return the Lord your God will bless you in all your efforts and in all your undertakings.
See, Bob? It's going to be okay.
For there will never cease to be needy ones in your land, which is why I command you, open your hand to the poor and needy kinsmen in your land.
All right, we're not going to go there now, but that's interesting that verse 4 says, there shall be no needy among you, because God's going to take care of you. And what did we just read?
There will always be.
There will always be needy among you. Oh.
But that's because that verse, the condition is that you have to heed all of God's instructions for there to be no needy.
So what are you suggesting, Richard? That the authors were saying there'll be no needy as long as you follow God's commandments, but of course we're not following God's commandments, therefore there's always going to be needy among us? That's pretty depressing.
Well, that's why the judges said
okay.
Or that they were needy and it's needy because we did wrong.
I'm just saying, to write, there will never be needy among you, blah, 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 and then there will always be needy among, why start with the first one? Why, let the prophet say that. Why am I writing that if I know we're not following it and there's always going to be needy? Why am I going to write the first part?
What was going on?
Then just say there's always going to be needy among you and deal with it, rather than there's never going to be needy among you, except there is.
Yeah.
Okay,
but it does make sense.
To you, maybe.
Well, they're just.
But that's
they don't say don't do. When they say don't do something, it's because people.
But that I understand. This makes no sense.
Really?
No.
Okay.
No. Why you say there's going to be no needy among you, and then they will never cease from among you? It doesn't say here's what should happen. It says there won't be any, except there will be forever. It's directly, and it's not conditional, by the way. If you follow my commandments, there will never be needy among you.
No.
It does not say that.
It's very contradictory.
It may be implied. It does not say that. If, however, there happens to be a needy person among you, and guess what? It will never cease that they're going to be needy. Okay, well, I'm not going to stay here. I don't want to stay here. Let's go on. 12, Bert.
I'm sorry.
If a fellow Hebrew man...
25:12.
15:12.
I'm sorry.
Deuteronomy.
I'm sorry. If a fellow Hebrew man or woman is sold to you, he shall serve you 6 years, and in the 7th year you shall set him free. When you set him free, do not let him go empty-handed. Furnish him out of the flock, threshing floor, and vat with which your God, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, has blessed you. Bear in mind that you were slaves in the land of Egypt, and your God, Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, redeemed you. Therefore, I enjoin this commandment upon you today.
All right, so this is what we read when we were reading about Hagar and Sarah. Remember when I asked us to read that story a different way this year? Yes? Based on this. That Hagar was actually being set free, which is why she's being given provisions, because you can't set a slave free without providing for them. All right, but I don't want to stay there either. So, so what does this text say? What does the Deuteronomist say? If you are sold a slave, how long are you allowed to own that slave?
6 years.
6 years. On the 7th year, the slave goes free. All right. We have 3 sources dealing with the idea of a release for the land. All 3 provide for a rest for the land. It's only in P and D that we see the idea of human beings also experiencing this release. Yeah? All right.
So if you were sold a slave in the 50th or 60th before the Jubilee, is the Jubilee a set time, or is it 50 years from the time you get this slave?
It depends which one we're talking about. If we're talking about Jubilee, it's a set time.
Yes.
Jubilee is a set time. The 6th or 7th year is in D is talking about since you got the slave. So that meant if I buy property from you in Israel, ancient Israel, how long am I buying that property for?
49 years.
No.
At most,
49.
Yeah.
49 years.
Whatever's left before the Jubilee.
What if there's only 10 years left before the Jubilee?
That's it then.
Well, how is that fair? That I'm going to pay the same price for that land as somebody else who gets 49 years, but I'm only getting 10 years?
I'm going to pay the same.
They adjust the price.
David is a businessman.
Prorated.
They didn't pay the same price.
We're not capitalists.
That's right. You paid based on how many years left until the Jubilee.
It's prorated.
Yeah.
What's interesting to me is this whole story being put in 3 different ways with some similarities when it probably never happened, has never happened, and why is it there? Except, is it only to say you have to treat humanity with more equity?
Yes, and I think Shemitah, they believe actually a form of Shemitah would have happened. Sort of like crop rotation. Like you let as a good practice, you let the land lie fallow in order for the nutrients and everything to build back up, so you don't strip the land, right? So that would have been good practice, but good Israelite practice would have been to put a theological explanation on top of that.
It's good farming practice.
Yeah.
Still.
No, it's really that far-fetched. So if you think about tribal land in California, you can't buy it. You can lease it for 99 years. So, it's not, when you think about it from a tribal point of view.
And if you think that this is written by a collection of tribes, a federation of tribes, it makes sense as not just a prescription by God, but as a treaty. Reuven may get too big for Reuven's britches and start taking land from Shimon, right? Because Shimon has a couple of crop failures or does something stupid with their money, and now Reuven has Shimon's property as well. It works to protect tribal control over tribal lands. We have to remember the ancient Israelites were a confederation of tribes. It was not a people before that, right? We keep buying this as history. This is not history. This is mythic history. What really happened is a loose confederation of 12 tribes would come together when there was an emergency. And then they went back to their territorial homelands and didn't deal with each other except through negotiations, right? It's under David that we see those 12 tribes become a nation state. Now you need a national identity. Hence, J and E get put together. Right, I've lost some people already, but it's okay. I'll just keep saying it. Because those of you who've been learning with me for 9 years, get this on some level, yes? That was repetition for you. So just don't worry. Just come for another 9 years, Mark, and it'll all make sense. I promise.
Well, take the 7th year.
It's really written in the third person. So there's some somebody telling what God said. People said, but it was written in the third person. And it's like we learned when we were in New Mexico, for example. The Pueblos, they have their own little places, but they come together as a federation, operating in the same way.
Yes. Yes. All right. So This is not, I will say it. I'm going to turn off my microphone maybe, but I will say no. I will say, so that nobody else hears outside this room, this is not one of the most exciting Torah portions for me. So when that happens, and I need to come teach y'all for an hour, I'm like, well, what could be one of the more radical reads on this, right? And so I go to books like Torah Queries. A queer reading of Torah. This is a collection of commentary on each of the parshiot from a queer perspective. Right? So let's see what a queer perspective of the Jubilee might be. And you're thinking to yourself, I do not know where that's going to go. So this is Dr. Rabbi Jacob Staub, a beloved teacher of ours at RRC. His specialty is the medieval year. He's the core teacher for the medieval year. He knows medieval poetry backwards and forwards. He knows the history of, the conquest by Islam. He knows everything about the medieval period, like it's ridiculous. And he's an amazing human being, So let's look at what Rabbi Dr. Jacob Staub has to say about Parshat Behar. So let's look at the quote he brings. Usually, I think I told you, I hate quotes at the beginning of chapters. I hate them. I think they're whatever. So I don't know why people feel they need to do that. But he actually references this quote later. So let's look at it. When Moses broke the sacred tablets on Sinai, the rich picked the pieces carved with adultery and kill and theft. And the poor got only don't. I know it's no here, but right, the essence is like no, you shall not is the right, don't is the meaning of no there. No adultery means don't commit adultery. All right, so that's what the poor got. All right, I love that and it does go right with this whole idea. All right, the queer perspective questions all norms. Not only norms of gender, role, and definition or sexual orientation, but all norms. From a queer perspective, norms are human attempts to simplify, classify, and regulate the complexities of reality. Reality, however, is inevitably messier than the categories we impose. There are always exceptions that do not conform to our classifications. The establishment of norms of any kind, therefore, is a process that essentially and inevitably excludes and pushes difference to the periphery, forcing diversity to mold itself into preset categories and condemning that which does not fit in. It is inherently oppressive. All right? I think most of us can agree with at least most of what Jacob is saying here. Yeah, that a queer perspective questions all categorization of human being and says we're just too complex to stick into a box.
Neat category.
So that it's always messier, and somebody in that classification system is always going to be pushed to a place where they don't belong because they're going to get defined as something that they don't necessarily want to be defined as. All right. Among the most pervasive of normative assumptions that a queer perspective challenges is that hierarchy is natural and inevitable. Economic hierarchy, social class distinctions, hierarchies of power. We are encouraged to assume that the state of inequity is built into reality. Some people are always wealthier than others. We can upend the current hierarchy, but when we do, the new order will itself be hierarchically ordered. Parshat Behar calls this assumption into question. It is a powerful text on which we can ground the queer perspective because it subverts the legitimacy of class distinctions. Leviticus 25, the first chapter of Behar, contains the only regulations in the Torah about land tenure and the rights of landowners to sell or mortgage their land. The law of Shemitah, or the sabbatical year, requires that in the 7th year, the land is to have a Shabbat. No sowing, reaping, or pruning is permitted. The Torah, however, is not content to explain Shemitah once. It does so 3 times, as we just saw, yeah? The version of this practice described in Exodus arises out of a concern for the poor, who are given exclusive access to the growth of the land in the sabbatical year. We just read that in Exodus. The version in Deuteronomy, the D source, emphasizes the remission of debts and the freeing of indentured servants. By contrast, Leviticus 25 seems unconcerned with either of these rationales. Instead, it declares in the 7th year the land shall have a Shabbat of complete rest, a Sabbath to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. The text is focused on the sanctity of the land itself and on God's ownership of the land. We are to let the land rest as a periodic reminder that it does not belong to us. Rather, it is ours temporarily as an achuzah, a long-term lease. Yeah? There is significant evidence that the Shemitah year was observed in ancient Israel. There is little evidence, however, for the observance of the ritual of land tenure, the Yovel, the Jubilee year, which is mentioned only here. All right, drop down to the practice of the Shemitah. The practice of the Shemitah and Yovel years reflects an extraordinary concern of the Torah to attend to the needs of the poor and to prevent excessive class distinctions. These institutions represent an acknowledgement of economic inequity and regularly set attempt to ameliorate its consequences. Parshat Behar is a central text in ongoing discussions about the political leanings of Jewish tradition. Right? There are political implications to overturning an assumed economic hierarchy of class. That's always going to have serious political implications, yes? All right, then there's he's talking about disagreeing about, interpretations. Drop down to Parshat Behar. Parshat Behar allows us to transcend the debate that happens through, the years about what actually was going on with the needy. The Jubilee text may describe an ideal that was never implemented, but its utopian character is precisely what gives it such breathtaking power. It questions all social and economic distinctions in the agrarian society of ancient Israel. It questions all norms, even as basic an economic practice as owning a piece of land that you have bought. Think about that. We take it for granted. But that is a radical challenging of the norms that when you buy a piece of land, it belongs to you. Jacob is saying this called into question absolute basic norms that would have been and we feel this way. If I buy it, it's mine. Well, once the bank doesn't own it anymore, right? Then it's mine. All right. Acknowledging the existence of economic oppression, of foreclosures and slavery, it assails the existence of these de facto realities on the most radical of bases. The land belongs to God, so it's not yours to sell, no matter how dire your economic straits. And since the Israelites are God's servants, they cannot sell themselves into permanent slavery. This text itself serves to queer the economic and social status quo in ancient Israel. To go down to the sabbatical year. The sabbatical year ameliorates injustice by reminding us that the earth belongs to God and must be cultivated accordingly. The Jubilee year eradicates injustice, or would have, if it had ever been instituted in a comprehensive way. Drop down. Next paragraph. Pursuing the objective of queering all norms, meaning what do we take from this? What if we took it as a challenge to us? Pursuing the objective of queering all norms, we can learn from the rationales with which Parshat Behar seeks to subvert economic and social hierarchies. Inasmuch as we were all slaves in Egypt and were redeemed by God, we have no right to oppress others because they are different, or to allow ourselves to be oppressed. The Torah suggests that only God the Redeemer has that right, not the very human poskim, the halachic authorities, who we referenced earlier, who read and misread texts in order to establish norms that regulate, exclude, and oppress. Inasmuch as everything we have ultimately is a gift from its true owner, capital O, we are not permitted to utilize our God-given resources to degrade other human beings or to allow ourselves to be degraded. Even if people want to pull from these texts and suggest that that's exactly what Torah is commanding us to do. Yes? So Jacob is saying, but Behar is asking us to queer the text, to queer the assumptions that underlie our society, and to say, if we take this seriously, you can't go to those texts because we belong to God. The land belongs to you. You can't use other texts to undercut this. You can't. This is saying, sorry, the fundamental idea here is that it doesn't belong to you. Even you don't belong to you. So if you don't belong to you, Cecile certainly can't belong to you. However much Cecile thinks she's your slave. She doesn't belong to you because you don't even belong to you. That's great. Think about that. Right? Wow. Okay. Alas, our text can only be stretched so far because it rests on another norm. The ancient division of the land of Israel into tribal holdings that it regards as permanent and divinely ordained. Alas. It presumes that all Israelites descend from those who settled the land after the conquest of Canaan, when the land of each of the tribes was neatly divided among members of the tribe. At the Jubilee, the original position to which everyone is to return is the land that is presumed to have belonged to one's clan since the original conquest. The Jubilee offers nothing to those who do not fit into an accepted ancient category. Those without clear, unblemished Israelite lineage. Those without children to inherit their land. Those with same-sex partners. Those who do not wish to be farmers, Richard Raje. Like all utopian visions, it rests on its own assumptions of what is ideal. So even if we queer something, we're starting with something that already has assumptions inherent in it, right? Because that's life. Here I turn to the fragment of Kaminsky's poem quoted in the epigraph. In rightly noting the difference in the way that the commandments are experienced by the rich and the poor, the poet implicitly suggests that before Moses smashed the tablets, the commandments would have been observed uniformly by rich and poor, or perhaps that there would have been no such class distinctions. Of course, much like the never implemented Jubilee, there never was a moment of intact tablets, intact commandments. Moses smashed them before he had them delivered to the people. There was never uniformity of relationship to these commandments because they never got there. They were already busted. And of course, if there had been such a hypothetical ideal moment, it would have been full to overflowing with norms. Shabbat observance, respect of parents, not speaking God's name, not coveting, and so on. From a queer perspective, would we prefer the intact tablets, the broken ones, or neither of them? Surprisingly, the rabbinic answer to this question is both of them. Rabbi Joseph taught that you smashed and you shall deposit them teaches us that both the tablets and the fragments of the tablets were deposited in the ark. This Talmudic passage imagines that both sets of tablets were placed in the Ark of the Covenant, carried around at the center of the Israelite camp in the wilderness for 40 years, and then placed in the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. The broken and the whole were at the center of the Israelite cult, the one testifying against the other in a tandem of ineffability. The broken and the whole were at the center of the Israelite cult, the one testifying against the other in a tandem of ineffability. Like the hypothetical Jubilee text that has stood through the ages as a perpetual critique of the imperfect, unjust state of our communities, so in the rabbinic imagination, at our spatial center, rested a graphic material acknowledgement that however we try to interpret and execute the divine will, we can never get it right, because God's will is beyond transcription. How very queer. Shabbat Shalom.
You've been listening to Rabbi Amy Bernstein's Friday Morning Torah Study from Kehillat Israel in Pacific Palisades, California. For more information, go to our website, www.ourki.org.